The day I died was my fiancé's wedding day. In a dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city, I bled from all my 7 orifices, slumped over a prayer mat, weeping before a dust-covered Guanyin statue. I have done no wrong against heaven or earth. So why have I ended up abandoned by all? Guanyin remained silent, gazing at me with sorrowful compassion. Outside, an urgent sound of galloping hooves broke through the stillness. Someone, cloaked in a frigid aura, approached me. My eyes had already lost their sight, yet I futilely turned toward his direction, my voice hoarse as I pleaded, "Whoever you are, please, ensure my body is taken care of. In the next life, I will surely repay you." He trembled as he held me in his arms. A single scorching tear fell upon my brow. It was the night of the first snowfall. The weather was bitterly cold. The cherished granddaughter of Marquis Zhongyang died in the wilderness at the age of 16. When I was 6 years old, I accompanied my grandmother to worship at the temple. At that time, I was still young, stepping into the Buddhist gates for the first time with no sense of reverence. Looking up at the grand golden Buddha statue, I neither knelt nor bowed. Instead, I tilted my head and smiled. It felt as though I was greeting an old friend returning home. The elderly abbot observed me for a long time before saying that in my previous life, I had been a small candlelight before the Buddha. Your ties to worldly matters are shallow. Your affinity with Buddhism is deep, and your fate is of utmost purity and nobility. I was too naive at that time to realize that such an extremely auspicious divination actually hid infinite suffering and sorrow. Separation in life, parting in death, dwelling beneath the seat of Guanyin, dying in a dilapidated temple. Counting back, 10 years passed like a dream. Every event seemed to fulfill that oracle. Your ties to worldly matters are shallow, your affinity with Buddhism is deep. As for the purity and nobility, perhaps the abbot had made a mistake. How could a girl who perished in the filth and mud be pure and noble in any way? But when I opened my eyes again, there was no snowstorm by my side, no sight of Guanyin. Time had rewound to the spring of my 14th year. The Marquis Zhongyang's household stood in its full glory, and my childhood sweetheart showed me deep affection. Yet, at the center of my brow, a newly formed red mole seemed to remind me. On that stormy night, in that dilapidated temple, I had promised someone a next life, and the Buddha had granted it to me. At the age of 14, the youngest granddaughter of the Marquis Zhongyang did 3 things. One spring night, I stepped into my grandfather's study. I asked my grandfather to be wary of an insignificant minor officer in the army. A year later, this officer would side with my grandfather's political enemies, fabricate evidence, and accuse my grandfather of colluding with the enemy to betray the nation, nailing his name to the pillar of shame. As for my grandmother, she would pass away from heartbreak and rage, her blood boiling as she died in a carriage on her way to petition the court. The moonlight poured down like water, and my grandfather gazed at me for a long time. He did not ask how I knew the officer's name, nor was he astonished by how I had come to understand so much about court affairs. He simply asked me, "I heard you had a nightmare last night. Are you feeling better now?" The candlelight flickered faintly, casting blurred shadows. My grandfather smiled as warmly as he used to, not at all resembling the cold, pale figure in the coffin. I lowered my lashes, tears nearly escaping. In the summer, I frequently visited Zhengguo Temple. The Empress Dowager, deeply devoted to Buddhism, had commissioned a statue of Guanyin from the temple to bring back to the palace. She needed a noble lady of high status to recite the Lotus Sutra for her. Half a year later, this duty would fall to the 9th princess. And because of the Empress Dowager's favoritism, the 9th princess would brazenly snatch my engagement and banish me to a temple. But now, when faced with the Empress Dowager's inquiry, the abbot recommended me instead. After all, who would be more suited to recite Buddhist scriptures than someone like me, a person who is said to be the reincarnation of a candlelight before the Buddha? In late autumn, I went to meet Pei Shu. Since awakening in the spring, I had repeatedly declined his requests to meet. At a banquet where our families crossed paths, the elders brought up the engagement. Grandmother only chuckled and said, "Childhood promises are mere jokes. How could they be taken seriously?" That well-mannered and composed young man eventually could not hold back and wrote me a letter. Ruoqi, What have I done wrong? And now, amidst the rustling fall of autumn leaves, he was still asking the same question. Ruochi, what have I done wrong? Counting both my previous and current lives, it had been nearly 2 years since we last saw each other. The young man's sideburns were sharp as if carved by a blade, his eyes deep and dark like ink, exuding elegance and clarity. No wonder the 9th princess fell in love with him at first sight and insisted on being with him even if she had to sacrifice someone's life. But Pei Shu, you've been close to me since we were young. How could you not know that as long as you said the word, that you wished to part ways with me, I would never cling to you? I was waiting for your sincere words, but you should not have greeted my tears with silence. That silence was indulgence toward the 9th princess, and a dagger stabbing into me. You had your bright future, and I had my dignity and pride, but you never considered me. As the sun slanted westward and tired birds returned to their nests, the glow of the evening light fell on the young man's shoulders, making him appear particularly tall and handsome. I looked up at him, my eyes curved in a smile. Pei Shu, do you love me? The young man froze for a moment, then softly replied, Ruochi? Aye. You love me, I said. Pei Shu's ears turned red as he awkwardly averted his gaze. But I continued anyway. You love me as the sole bloodline of Marquis Zhongyang. You love me as the famed candlelight before the Buddha. You love me as the one chosen by the Empress Dowager to serve beneath the seat of Guanyin. You love all those versions of me. I paused slightly and voiced the answer that had lingered in my mind 1,000 times over. But you do not love me as Song Ruochi. Pei Shu's face turned ashen in an instant. I only felt a deep sorrow. Pei Shu, you will never love anyone. You only love yourself. After a long, silent exchange of gazes, Pei Shu staggered away in despair. Still dressed in his usual elegant white robes, his demeanor appeared composed, yet his steps faltered. I stood under the eaves, silently watching him leave. Pei Shu, once upon a time, someone saw you as her lifelong partner, imagining growing old with you, surrounded by children and grandchildren. But that girl died in the winter of her 16th year. Her heart had long since frozen solid. I softly closed my eyes. A single tear slipped down the corner of my eye, disappearing without a trace. That day, heavy snow fell. The palace maid came early, delivering a fox fur cloak, saying it was bestowed by the Empress Dowager to ensure I wouldn't catch cold. Turning along the small path, I approached the Buddha Hall. Before the hall knelt a young man, his clothing not particularly thick. Snow had already accumulated on his shoulders. I looked at him a few more times, and he seemed to notice, looking back at me. He was stunningly handsome, with deep-set features and eyes like cold stars. The palace maid whispered in my ear, Miss, do not get entangled with the 5th prince. His fate is cursed, and his future is bleak. So, it was him, the 5th prince, Guju Yuan. It was said that on the day he was born, a celestial anomaly occurred. A long, white rainbow pierced through the sun. A white rainbow piercing the sun was considered an ominous sign, signifying that the imperial fortune would be usurped. Thus, His Majesty disliked this sun and had ignored him for years, almost abandoning him. I withdrew my gaze, holding my umbrella as I continued walking. Having been granted a second chance at life, I could not afford a single mistake. Guju Yuan was pitiable, but he was not someone for me to pity. Yet, as we brushed past each other, a familiar scent wafted through the air. I stopped in disbelief. The cold wind stirred the hem of his robe, and the young man, expressionless, met my gaze. As if compelled by some unseen force, I extended my hand toward him. You? He furrowed his brows, turned his head away, avoiding my hand, his eyes filled with caution and confusion. I stood silent for a long time, as if waking from a dream, and whispered, "Sorry." The snow was still falling, and I forced myself to continue walking forward. The palace maid asked curiously, "Miss, what happened just now? Could it be that you've met the 5th prince before?" Guju Yuan and I, across 2 lifetimes, had met only twice. Once was just now. The other was at the moment of my death. At that time, blood streamed from my 7 orifices, and he held me in his arms. I heard his choked breaths and smelled the icy scent of cedar on his robe. As I gasped for my final breaths, I begged him to take care of my body. He shed tears that fell onto my brow, forming a new cinnabar mole. That night, he said hoarsely that he was late. I had thought he was an old friend of mine. Now I realize that back then, I did not know him at all. Song Ruo-chi and Gu Yuan, in our previous lives, had no connection whatsoever. Inside the Buddha hall, the charcoal fire burned brightly. The Empress Dowager knelt on a prayer mat, her mind focused and tranquil. I knelt beside her, chanting Buddhist scriptures, constantly cultivating Buddhist wisdom, possessing great spiritual power, well-versed in all the ways of Dharma, upright and without deceit, with a firm and resolute mind. Such bodhisattvas fill the land. 2 hours ago, a palace maid had secretly told me that Gu Yuan's mother was dying of illness, and he had come to plead for a physician for her. But the Empress Dowager had no intention of helping him. The Empress Dowager had 6 grandsons and 11 granddaughters. If one were to count the children of the princes outside the palace, there would probably be dozens of children who called her grandmother. Among them were no shortage of clever, charming, and perceptive ones. However, Gu Yuan's personality was cold and stubborn, and he bore the ominous sign of the white rainbow piercing the sun. He had never won the Empress Dowager's favor. It was understandable that the Empress Dowager did not want to help him. But I wanted to help him. Because in my past life, I had promised him that if there were a next life, I would repay him. Here in the Buddha hall, before the Bodhisattva, I did not want to break my word. Outside, the snow fell heavier and heavier. The northern wind howled, slamming against the window lattice with a constant rattle. Through the window, the figure kneeling outside seemed to be losing his strength, and his body swayed. My voice reciting the scriptures involuntarily paused for a moment. The Empress Dowager seemed to sense something and looked at me. "Are you tired? Take a break?" She rose slowly, and I hurried to support her. The Empress Dowager reached out to touch my face and said, "The Emperor brought back a deer from his winter hunt and sent it to me. It's been hard for you to eat vegetarian food with me for so long. Go back early today, and I'll have the Imperial chef roast some venison for you." I glanced at the window and finally couldn't help but speak. "The 5th prince has been kneeling outside for nearly half a day." The Empress Dowager glanced indifferently and summoned headmaid Lan Ting. "Tell him to go back." I followed Lan Ting out of the hall. The wind and snow were so fierce that I could barely keep my eyes open. Gu Yuan still knelt in the snow, his entire body stiff, already resembling a snowman. Lan Ting spoke in her usual measured tone. "You, Highness, the Empress Dowager asks you to return." He didn't move. His voice, hoarse and broken, repeated the same plea. "My mother is gravely ill, on the verge of death. I beg the Empress Dowager's pity to summon the imperial physician." Lan Ting maintained her response. "Your Highness, please return." Gu Yuan lowered his head deeply. A flash of despair crossed his face as he asked, word by word, "My mother has always been kind and virtuous. Her greatest mistake in life was giving birth to me. If I die, can she be saved?" The young man had nothing of value, and to save his mother, the most precious thing he could offer was his own life. The snow fell ceaselessly, blanketing everything in silence. Lan Ting was silent for a long time, her gaze filled with pity. After a long pause, she spoke softly, "Your Highness, that's not how things are calculated in the palace." Amid the swirling snow, the young man closed his eyes briefly, the corners of his mouth tugging into a faint smile. It was a smile so bleak it bordered on despair. Then he stopped pleading, placed his hands on the snowy ground, and struggled to stand up. He had knelt for too long, and his knees were stiff and unresponsive. When he finally managed to rise, he nearly fell again. I discarded my umbrella and caught him instinctively, blurting out, "Let me walk you back." His wrist was nearly devoid of warmth, so cold it sent a chill straight to my heart. Gu Yuan recoiled as though burned, snow resting on his eyelashes, his tone as frigid as the weather itself. "Thank you, Miss Song, but I can walk on my own." I wasn't annoyed, and only said, "We're heading in the same direction. I'm not taking a special trip for your sake." Lan Ting personally picked up the oiled paper umbrella and handed it back to me, seemingly wanting to say something. I took it and spoke first. "Please remember to prepare some loquat and pear soup for the Empress Dowager tonight. It's freezing, and her throat condition might worsen by tomorrow." Lan Ting gazed at me quietly for a moment, then nodded kindly. "You are thoughtful, miss. The road is slippery in the snow. Please watch your step so you don't fall." Her words carried a deeper meaning. I understood, and so did Guju Yuan. As soon as we exited the palace gate, he said indifferently, "Miss Song, please go back." I merely replied, "We really are heading the same way." He kept his eyes fixed ahead, his voice hoarse and weary. Bodhi House and Chixia Palace are in opposite directions. I was surprised by his knowledge of me. After a moment's thought, I understood. As the most favored noble lady by the Empress Dowager, even if he had no intention of befriending me, he would still have heard of me. I thought for a moment and said, "Then, do you also know that I have a little knowledge of medicine?" Guju Yuan suddenly looked up at me. His eyes, like cold stars, clearly reflected my appearance. It was as if a traveler who had been walking in the darkness for too long finally saw a glimmer of light. At last, he lowered his guard. My heart ached a little, but I just tilted my head and smiled. "Your Highness, please lead the way." Chixia Palace had been out of favor for many years, and even the walls appeared dull and faded. Here, even charcoal was a rare commodity. Despite the doors and windows being tightly shut, there wasn't much warmth to be gathered. In the vast palace, not a single palace maid could be seen. Consort Lin lay on the bed, covered with layers upon layers of quilts, yet her palms remained icy cold. Suddenly, I recalled the scene before my death. The same bitter cold and emptiness, the same desolation and despair. The difference was, back then, Guju Yuan had arrived in time. But now, Guju Yuan and I arrived together. I held her wrist to take her pulse, but I was only half competent. Years ago, when my grandmother fell ill, doctors had come and gone, and I had picked up a bit of superficial knowledge. Consort Lin's pulse was weak and rough, with a sensation like beads rolling on a plate. It indicated a chronic illness compounded by an aggressive new disease. At some point, Consort Lin had woken up. Her face was puffy and pale, and her pitch-black eyes stared straight at me. Guju Yuan crouched down and softly said, "Mother, she is." He suddenly paused, as if unsure how to introduce me. I stepped in and said, "I'm a female physician, here to treat you." Consort Lin grabbed my hand, her voice frail and trembling. I knew it. His Majesty hasn't forgotten me. Her face, haggard and worn from the torment of illness, unexpectedly showed a hint of girlish innocence at the mention of His Majesty. Guju Yuan turned his face away, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes. I noticed it. Gently patting Consort Lin's hand, I soothed her. His Majesty wants you to rest well and take your medicine. When you're better, he will naturally come to see you. Consort Lin mumbled something incoherent before slipping back into a deep sleep. In the corridor, the cold wind cut like a knife. Consort Lin's pulse lingered in my mind, and for a moment, I didn't know how to start. Guju Yuan seemed to see through me and said calmly, "Miss Song, please speak freely." I sighed softly. I'm afraid Consort Lin won't make it through this winter. Guju Yuan closed his eyes. After a long pause, he said, "For her, it might be a kind of relief." The dim candlelight cast his shadow on the ground, so fragile, so lonely. I couldn't help but ask, "But what about you?" He looked at me, his dark eyes filled with confusion. "Me?" I swallowed the bitterness rising in my heart and asked, "If the last person in this world who cares about you is gone, what will you do?" He froze. After a long while, he replied faintly, "Whatever I did before, I will continue to do in the future." I shook my head. "I'm afraid it won't be up to you." As they grew older, any prince with a potential claim to the throne would be drawn into the power struggle. Whether he fought for it or not, the humiliations and pain he had experienced before would only intensify in the future. Guju Yuan seemed to understand my words and fell into a long silence. He smiled bitterly. "But Miss Song, someone like me has never truly had a choice." A gust of wind blew in, snuffing out the candle. Darkness enveloped the surroundings. Guju Yuan got up to get a fire starter, but I grabbed his sleeve. The young man turned back to look at me. A sliver of light shone through the window, showing a particular affection for his features. In his deep, dark gaze, there was inquiry and resistance, but he did not shake off my hand. I heard my own voice. "Guju Yuan, do you have any wishes?" Calling him by his full name, such disrespect. Yet he didn't seem to mind. He simply smiled and said, "They can never be fulfilled." I didn't let go and stubbornly looked at him. "Say it. What if they can come true?" He shook his head. "Forget it." He started to walk away, but I refused to let go and fell to the ground awkwardly. Yuan paused, bent down, and reached out to pull me up, but I refused to stand. Gripping his hand, I pressed on, unwilling to give up. You're only 16. You shouldn't live like an old man on the verge of death. You must have a wish. If you refuse to say it, who can help you fulfill it? The young man cornered finally showed a hint of his true nature. I want the white rainbow piercing the sun to be seen as a blessing. I want Chixia Palace to truly bask in the glow of dawn. I want this entire world to kneel at my feet. Miss Song, who could make these happen? You? His powerful words echoed through the empty courtyard. In that moment, Yuan's gaze burned with the intensity of flames, his presence sharp like a blood-stained blade. But the very next second, he looked at me and smiled, his expression cold and indifferent. Miss Song, if you came here to probe for my innermost thoughts, you can go back and report now. However, my true feelings are worthless. So he still believed I had ulterior motives. Of course he did. He was a scorned and battered little wolf cub. When faced with warmth, he would only suspect that there was a trap and would never believe that it was actually full of sincerity. I took a deep breath, grabbed his wrist, and looked up at him. It was an upward gaze. And even before the Buddha, I had never been this devout. Yuan, whether you believe it or not, I came to help you fulfill your wishes. The boy squinted slightly, then suddenly leaned in close. His eyes locked onto mine. It was both an examination and an exploration. The cold cedar scent on his robes overwhelmed my senses, leaving me drowning in the depths of his dark eyes, as the scene at the end of my life resurfaced again and again. Do you know what that kind of loneliness and despair feels like? When everyone had deserted and betrayed me, only you, who had never met me before, came to see me. I don't know what kind of connection we had before that, and I'm destined not to find the answer. But Yuan, I made a promise. If there was another life, I would repay you. And now, this is my new life. The wind and snow had just stopped, and everything was silent. The young man reached out in confusion and wiped away my tears. Only then did I realize that I had been crying. He remained quiet for a long while, then solemnly met my gaze and softly said, Miss Song, I have nothing to give in return. I exhaled gently and replied with sincerity, Yuan, you've already repaid me, even if you didn't know it. Winter passed and spring arrived. In the small courtyard of Bodhi House, Miss Song met many people and handled many affairs. During the bitterly cold days, it was only natural that Miss Song caught a cold. The Imperial Medical Bureau immediately sent the best female physician to treat her. But when she arrived, she was actually treating Consort Lin, who had been out of favor for many years. To treat Consort Lin, high-quality medicinal herbs were needed. Without hesitation, Miss Song offered her own personal stash, urging the physician to use whatever was necessary to prepare the medicine. Deer antlers, ginseng, snow lotus, as long as the female physician requested it, Miss Song supplied without batting an eye. Miss Song knew how to handle matters. She gifted the physician fine clothes and jewelry, and even sent people to Wuxi, her hometown, to visit the physician's parents and younger brother, delivering New Year's money as a gesture of goodwill. With such a combination of kindness and authority, the female physician came and went, only talking about Miss Song's illness and never mentioning Consort Lin. Meanwhile, at the Marquise Zhongyang's residence, the household had recently been preoccupied with acquiring ancient books and polishing weapons. The head of the family had dedicated their life to the nation, leaving only the old Marquise and his wife with a young granddaughter as their legacy. The little granddaughter, who once favored chanting Buddhist scriptures, seemed to have recently awakened some of her martial bloodline. She now loved studying military strategy and enjoyed wielding weapons, be it blade or spear. When the old Marquise and his wife spoke of her, they merely smiled, saying their Ruoqi had always been mischievous from a young age. There was nothing they could do but go along with her. However, in the back courtyard of the Marquise Zhongyang's residence, the one holding either a book or a sword was not Miss Song, but a young man. The young man, having lived in seclusion and obscurity for years, had been largely forgotten by the outside world. Thus, when he finally emerged, everyone assumed he was a distant relative of the Song family. No one considered that he might have any connection to the ill-omened figure within the deep palace, the one whose fate was symbolized by a white rainbow piercing the sun. Others didn't know about these things, but my grandparents were fully aware. I had been waiting for them to call me over for questioning. Yet, all I received was the precious medicinal herbs grandmother had packed for me, and grandfather inexplicably going to the backyard to personally instruct Guanyin in martial arts. My confusion did not escape their notice. One early spring evening, they began to casually chat with me, recounting events from the past. Guanyin had grown up in the deep confines of the imperial palace, with no one to care for him and little known about him by others. Most people had likely forgotten that his mother also came from a family of military generals. Before entering the palace, Consort Lin had been a rare female general in the capital. Before the ominous sign of the white rainbow piercing the sun appeared, Qixia Palace had been filled with many secret martial techniques passed down through generations. Those were gifts prepared by Consort Lin's father for his little grandson, hoping that one day the boy would grow up to become a great general, leading armies into battle and galloping across the fields. However, one pronouncement from the Imperial Astronomical Bureau ended the future of this family. Grandmother said calmly, "The white rainbow piercing the sun can signify either the theft of imperial fortune or the birth of a hero." Do you know why the Imperial Astronomical Bureau chose to interpret it as a bad omen? The year Guanyin was born, the struggle in the harem was intense. Consort Lin's father was campaigning on the battlefield, earning numerous merits. Consort Lin, in turn, received immense favor from the emperor. That year, she and Consort Yu both became pregnant. Everyone said that if Consort Lin gave birth to a prince, the position of crown prince would likely go to her child. But Consort Yu's maternal grandfather was the head of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau. Later, Consort Yu gave birth to the fourth prince. Afterwards, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau declared that the fifth prince was an ill-fated individual. Consort Yu's daughter was none other than the ninth princess. She and her mother had always been adept at employing such schemes. Seeing that I had understood, grandmother smiled and patted my head. The fifth prince is a man of deep loyalty and honor. If you help him, he will remember the favor. Knowing this, I can rest assured. I promised Guanyin that I would create an opportunity for him to stand openly before His Majesty. Whether he could seize this opportunity or not would depend on himself. Day after day, month after month passed. I continued to recite scriptures daily in the Buddha Hall of Shokong Palace. Meanwhile, Guanyin had taken root in the backyard of my home, studying his sword under the lamplight. During his days confined to the cold palace, he had already immersed himself in the art of war. What he lacked was a great teacher, and what my family had the most were great teachers. The candlelight in the study always burned until the third watch of the night, as Guanyin and my grandfather strategized over sand tables, conquering battlefields in their discussions. Guanyin visibly grew more composed and wise with each passing day, but my grandfather seemed to age bit by bit, as if he were pouring all his energy into lifting something up. Sometimes my heart ached for my aging grandfather, and I forbade them from burning the midnight oil. Guanyin would look at me apologetically, but my grandfather would smile and reassure me it was no trouble. The early summer evening breeze was still a bit chilly, and I wasn't sure if I heard a sigh. "I don't know how much longer I'll be able to accompany you," he said. That year, I was 15. There were 7 months left before the calamity of confiscation that had ended my family in my previous life. That day, as I came out of the Buddha Hall, the female physician came looking for me anxiously. "Consort Lin is not doing well. She's currently being kept alive with strong medicine. The fifth prince is nowhere to be found. Miss Song, would you like to go and see her?" I immediately sent my personal maid to deliver the news and set out for Qixia Palace myself. Since her serious illness in the winter, she had held on for nearly half a year. This time, when I saw her again, her gaze was unusually clear. "You are the youngest granddaughter of Marquis Zhongyang, Ruozi?" She reached out gently, caressing my cheek. "You look so much like your mother." It was only then that I learned my mother, Consort Lin, and headmaid Lan Ting had once been close friends. Suddenly, everything made sense to me. Why Chixia Palace, despite years of being out of favor, had managed to preserve their lives. Why, despite my long-standing connection with Chixia Palace, not a word of it had leaked out. Your mother and I loved wielding blades and practicing martial arts, but Lanting was the strategist among us. Later, I entered the palace, while your mother went with your father to defend the frontier. You cannot imagine how much I envied her. But then my family earned repeated military honors, and His Majesty treated me exceptionally well. I thought, with my beloved by my side, I was already fortunate. I just didn't expect the imperial family to be so fickle, and men are even more heartless. He knew full well that the pronouncement from the Imperial Astronomical Bureau was a ploy to frame me, yet he still used it as a pretext to destroy my family. The woman on the bed gazed into the distance, her eyes filled with memories, as if reliving all the love and hate of the past. But her tone, like one arranging her final affairs, sent chills through my heart. I couldn't say a word. I could only hold her hand tightly. "You'll get better, Your Highness. The fifth prince is becoming more diligent by the day. I believe he just needs the right opportunity, and he will." Consort Lin interrupted me with a bitter smile. "I'm the one dragging him down." I froze. Behind me, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed. The young man rushed in, weary and covered in dust. Consort Lin looked at Guju Yuan and said gently, "I am very selfish. I didn't dare to tell you that it was actually I who dragged you down. You always thought you were born under an ominous sign and brought misfortune to me, but in truth, it was all my fault." Guju Yuan didn't say anything. With a thud, he knelt at her bedside. I had never seen such a flustered expression on his face before. Consort Lin reached out and stroked his head, smiling faintly. "My son, you should have had a boundless future, but instead, you spent 17 years with me in this cold palace. It was my fault for misjudging the man I married. It was my fault for being powerless in palace struggles. I had a good youth, able to ride horses freely, but my son did not." Her smile gradually turned into tears, yet she grabbed my hand tightly. It was the posture of a mother pleading. "Ruoqi, Miss Song, I've been ill for many years, but I know you are a kind-hearted girl. My son has no one to rely on. Be good to him. Even if I am in the underworld, I will repay you." A tear slid down her aged face. Her gaze gradually became unfocused, yet she stubbornly refused to close her eyes. I held her hand tightly, repeatedly reassuring her, "I will. I promise I will." In early summer, the lotus leaves began to sprout. Chixia Palace had once welcomed a female general. She had commanded vast frontiers, wielded sharp blades and spears. She was a woman who galloped freely on horseback, but was long trapped in the struggles of the harem. She lost everything, leaving behind only a stubborn child. That child was 17 this year, his shoulders as slender yet resilient as fresh bamboo shoots. But when he closed his mother's eyes for the last time, his demeanor was as somber as a blade tempered 1,000 times. He didn't shed a single tear. I cried for him over and over again. In the end, he pulled me into his arms and murmured, "Don't cry." It was our first embrace, yet it felt as though it had happened countless times before, and I never truly understood how much pain was buried beneath his restrained breaths. After Consort Lin's death, Guju Yuan became even more diligent in his studies and training. Even grandfather urged me to talk to him. Looking at his bloodshot eyes from staying up too late, all I could say was, "You need to take care of yourself." He only smiled and instead reminded me that the weather was getting colder and that I should dress warmly. And so, from summer to autumn, he pushed himself relentlessly, as if staking his life on his efforts. Only when he saw me did he take a short nap. Guju Yuan was utterly exhausted. He pretended to be asleep, but really fell asleep. I sat beside him, fanning him, my heart filled with bitterness. Even in his dreams, his expression was restless. His hands were tightly clenched, as if he were fighting someone. I reached out gently to take his hand, and he startled awake in an instant. His gaze was sharp and hostile, and he reflexively flung me to the ground. His punches were swift and forceful, but when he realized it was me, he abruptly shifted his aim, smashing the stones instead. His hands were covered in blood, yet he paid no attention to them, hurrying over to check on me. "Miss Song, I'm sorry." As I applied medicine to his wounds, I sighed, "You're too consumed by worry. I'm afraid you'll drive yourself mad." He lowered his lashes. "As long as you're here, I won't go mad. I wouldn't dare." I froze. In a soft voice, he continued, "When you first met me, I had already lost all my spirit and drive. You once asked me, if my mother passed away, what would I do? Back then, I thought, at worst, I'd follow her in death. I immediately replied, 'You mustn't.' He looked at me and smiled. 'You saved me.' The young man, long confined in the deep palace, had lost all his edge in the endless waiting. In the face of unending suffering and torment, the only thing keeping him alive was his ailing mother on her sickbed. When his mother was seriously ill and dying, he knelt in the heavy snow, begging for a physician. He heard the sound of chanting from the Buddha hall and caught the faint scent of sandalwood. In despair, he thought, 'Bodhisattva, if you can see me, I am willing to exchange my life for hers.' But the Bodhisattva did not answer him. Instead, he met a girl. Her eyes sparkled with sincere trust and care. She paved the way for him and made plans for him. He did not know when his feelings began, but because of this genuine kindness, he found hope again. On the day of the first snowfall, the bitter cold pierced the air. The fifth prince in the cold palace was reborn. At the end of a long day, the evening glow spread across the sky. Guanyin stood amidst the radiance, his dark eyes reflecting my image. It seemed as though he had countless things to say, but in the end, he spoke just one resolute sentence. "Miss Song, for you, I will brave any danger." The sweet scent of osmanthus wafted through the air. The Empress Dowager's birthday was approaching. Various rare treasures were presented as gifts, but the Empress Dowager showed particular fondness for mine. It was an ancient text from the library of Zhengguo Temple. The text contained Buddhist verses as well as astronomical records. However, the most significant line was not scripture but a prediction. A white rainbow pierces the sun. A hero is born. If that were all, it would not have been remarkable. On the 19th of the second month, the birthday of Guanyin Bodhisattva, I drew an extremely auspicious fortune stick for the Empress Dowager. This fortune stick, coupled with the ancient text, became my gift for the Empress Dowager's 60th birthday. The fortune stick bore this inscription: "In the east, clouds rise with a fair moon, but soon clouds obscure half its light. Do not lament when the full turns to waning, for where it wanes, it shall soon regain." The Empress Dowager pondered for a long while and then remarked, "A waning moon that regains fullness, it feels as though someone is destined to be rescued." Lanting contemplated and said, "All the princes in the palace have their mothers to care for them, and none fit the image of a waning moon. If we're talking about a waning moon becoming full again, it sounds like the one in Chixia Palace." The Empress Dowager nodded. "That child's mother? Wasn't she the second daughter of General Lin? She used to be a general, too." Lanting replied, "Now that I think about it, he has always been respectful and humble, quietly residing in the cold palace, never uttering a word of complaint. That day, when he was begging for a physician for his mother, he even asked me if he could exchange his life for hers. He is very filial and kind." The Empress Dowager rubbed her temples and sighed. "I wonder if it's my age. I increasingly long for harmony among my children and grandchildren. That child is indeed pitiful. His mother is gone, and he has no one to rely on." Seizing the moment, Lanting added, "The only person the fifth prince can rely on now is you." Recently, the emperor's health had been poor, but the position of crown prince remained undecided. Both the front court and the inner palace swirled with intrigue and schemes. The concubines and princes began testing the waters, using the Empress Dowager's birthday as an excuse to seek her favor and support. But the Empress Dowager had never been one for making the rich richer. She preferred to offer help to those in hardship. After that, in the Buddha hall, besides me, there was now Guanyin. I continued reciting the Lotus Sutra. The Empress Dowager, however, held a roster of officials and explained each name to Guanyin in detail. Guanyin was respectful and humble. While listening to the teachings, he served the Empress Dowager her medicine, acting as a perfect filial grandson. On the day of the Empress Dowager's birthday, she had Guanyin sit beside her in the seat of honor. The crowd was stunned. But even His Majesty tacitly approved. I watched as Guanyin interacted with others, his demeanor impeccable. Then I watched him perform a sword dance as a birthday celebration, his movements smooth and graceful. The young man was exceptionally handsome. His sword dance was like a song in motion, every movement exuding natural charisma and confidence. I had always known this. He was a longsword that had been sheathed for too long. Once revealed, his roar would surely shake the heavens. The Empress Dowager looked at him with great satisfaction. The Emperor even tested him on the spot. In both literary knowledge and military strategy, Gu Zhuyuan responded fluently, his eloquence drawing continuous nods of approval from the Emperor. Whether it was noble ladies or sons of prestigious families, all their gazes were fixed on him. I could even hear some whispering. "So this is the fifth prince? How come I've never seen him before? His looks are too outstanding. It makes one imagine how beautiful Consort Lin must have been during her lifetime." Shh! Don't let the ninth princess hear that. Their mothers were sworn enemies. The ninth princess, dressed in a soft yellow gown, sat to the right with an unhappy expression. The arrogance between her eyebrows was exactly the same as in my previous life. It was the first time I had seen her in this life. Since entering the palace to recite sutras for the Empress Dowager, she had invited me several times to enjoy tea or flowers with her. I declined every time. The pain she caused me in my past life ran too deep. I feared that seeing her would drown me in hatred. Even though I had prepared myself, meeting her today still left me short of breath. When no one was paying attention, I quietly slipped outside for some air. I wandered into the garden and ran into Pei Shu. Still dressed in his signature pale moon-colored robe, he looked calm and elegant. The moment I saw him, I wanted to hide, but he called out to me instead. "Ruoqi, I have something to say to you." Beside the clear waters, the flowers bloomed brilliantly. The young man's face, however, was somewhat pale. "You and I have been childhood friends since we were young. I took your kindness towards me for granted, never considering that you could have other choices. This is my greatest mistake, right?" I finally heard Pei Shu's heartfelt words for the first time in both my past and present lives. Before my reincarnation, because of him, I experienced humiliation and torment. The ninth princess issued an edict that demoted me to a dilapidated temple. In the harshest winter, I fetched icy water to clean Buddha statues. My hands were covered in frostbite, festering and oozing pus. I was no longer the noble lady of the Marquis's household, whose delicate hands had once played the kin, renowned throughout the capital. Yet the ninth princess was not satisfied. On my birthday, she came to the temple. She hung a curtain and asked me to play Buddhist music for a distinguished guest. The chin was specially made, every string cut into my fingers. By the end of the melody, my hands were soaked in blood. A gust of wind lifted a corner of the curtain, and I saw it clearly. The guest listening to my music was none other than Pei Shu. Pei Shu. You and I were childhood friends. We learned to play the chin together, studied together. You couldn't have failed to recognize my playing, nor could you have failed to hear my pained sobs, nor could you have forgotten that day was my 16th birthday. Yet, when the ninth princess asked you how my playing was, you simply remarked, "Not half as good as the princess." You made me the most laughable woman in the world. And now, I finally understood what you thought. My kindness towards you had become the reason you could so easily discard me. I wanted to laugh, yet somehow my eyes grew wet. Pei Shu did not notice. He said, "Ruoqi, you and I are childhood friends. We are meant to be together. I understand my mistakes now, and I will change. Ruoqi, I only said, we were merely childhood playmates. There's no need for you to change anything for me. Young Master Pei, please leave." He froze, unable to believe it, and reached out to grab my hand. "What did you say?" In the struggle, the jade bracelet on my wrist fell and shattered. He stood there, stunned. I knelt down to pick up the pieces, speaking softly, "This was the birthday gift you gave me when I was 14. Pei Shu stammered, "Ruoqi, I didn't mean to." Gathering the broken jade in my palm, I smiled faintly. Now that the bracelet is broken, so too is our bond. Young Master Pei, please don't entangle yourself with me anymore. He was shocked and angry and reached out to pull me. If one is broken, I can give you 10, 100 more. Song Rochi, why are you treating me like this? He asked sincerely, so I sincerely told him. I avoided mentioning the past and present lives and simply said that I had had a long dream. In the dream, my grandfather was falsely accused, and my grandmother fell gravely ill. No one in the capital dared to treat my family, so I had no choice but to seek help from my fiancé. But he told me, "Ruoqi, times are different now. I can no longer be associated with your family." When the princess fell in love with him at first sight, he couldn't wait to break off our engagement. Later, I played the Qin in the dilapidated temple, covered in blood. Then, after failing to file a petition to the emperor, I returned in disgrace after being paraded through the streets. And later still, I met a tragic end in that dilapidated temple, while the entire Pei family was decorated with lanterns and festoons. The second son of the Pei family was going to marry the princess. My life was the betrothal gift he gave her. Pei Shu froze, finally protesting. "That was just your dream," I smiled. But the fact remains, the ninth princess has indeed fallen for you, hasn't she? The rumors spread like wildfire in the streets, saying that by the Baishi River, the ninth princess fell off a boat. It was a fine young man from the Pei family who dove into the water to save her. Since then, carriages from the palace frequently visited the Pei residence. The ninth princess ostensibly went to appreciate flowers with the daughters of the Pei family, but in truth, she was there for someone else. Young Master Pei, you want to have both beauties by your side, but I refuse to be a pawn in your game. Pei Shu's face turned deathly pale. He grabbed me, trying to explain. It's not like that. Ruoqi? When the bracelet fell and shattered earlier, it had cut my wrist. Now Pei Shu's grip pressed into the wound, causing sharp pain that made tears well up in my eyes. Let go. A tall figure stepped out from behind, shoving him to the ground in one swift motion. Guju Yuan shielded me behind him, looking down at Pei Shu with a cold and indifferent expression. Miss Song told you to let go. Didn't you hear her? Pei Shu walked away, utterly dejected. I hastily wiped my tears and mocked myself. Am I a complete joke? But then I heard him say, Miss Song, you always treat people with genuine sincerity. That's wonderful and brave. He doesn't deserve you. My wrist was gently pulled over by him. The wound, which Pei Shu hadn't noticed, was clearly seen by him. Guju Yuan carefully wiped it clean with a handkerchief and then tenderly wrapped it up. Afterward, he opened my palm and threw the shards of jade onto the ground. The jade is broken. Forget about it. A bracelet made of white jade was placed in my hand. Replace it with a new one. The new one is better. During these past few months at the Marquise Zhongyang's residence, Guju Yuan had acquired a fine piece of jade. He rarely had free time, so he would carve it under the lamp late at night. He was a novice, unfamiliar with carving, so his hands became covered in scars. When grandfather saw this, he suggested taking it to a jade workshop to have a master craftsman carve it instead. But Guju Yuan insisted that he wanted to give it as a gift, and that carving it himself was the only way to show sincerity. I had assumed it was for consort Lin. Unexpectedly, he gave it to me. The bracelet was light, yet it felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. It pressed heavily against my chest, and I was on the verge of tears. I originally wanted to give this to you on your birthday, but I don't want to see you sad. I stubbornly retorted, I'm not sad at all. Guju Yuan smiled slowly. Yes, you're not sad. I'm the one who's sad. This usually cold and tough young man showed worry and distress for the first time. When you're sad, I feel even sadder. Miss Song, do you think I'm sick? I stared at him, stunned. What did you just say? He looked into my eyes, his gaze soft and gentle. Miss Song, I said, I like you. Not long after the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, the head of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau was imprisoned for dereliction of duty. On the first day of his successor's appointment, the new head solemnly declared that a celestial interpretation from 17 years ago had been erroneous. A white rainbow piercing the sun signified the birth of a hero. Now it was time to correct the mistake and announce it to the world. Everyone knew what the Imperial Astronomical Bureau's pronouncement meant. The seating arrangement at the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet also reached everyone's ears. The decorations in the Qixia Palace were completely refreshed, and treasures flowed into the palace like water. Yet the owner of Qixia Palace paid no heed to these things. He still loved to frequent Marquis Zhongyang's residence. This year, I was 15. It was 1 month before the calamity that had ruined my family in my previous life. I grew somewhat neurotic, plagued by constant nightmares at night. When, startled awake in the middle of the night, I would run to my grandfather and grandmother's chambers, just to confirm that they were sleeping peacefully. One night, I woke up from a dream, and it was pitch black outside the window. The night lamp that had been left on had been blown out by the wind at some point. It felt like I was in that dilapidated temple again. Without even putting on my shoes, I scrambled out of bed, stumbling through the long corridors. The wind howled, and the night rain was icy cold. The corridor seemed endless, and no matter how far I went, I could not find my grandparents' courtyard. Shivering from the cold, my voice was stuck, unable to even let out a whimper. A pair of hands reached out from behind me, pulling me into a tight embrace. Panicked, I looked up and saw Gu Yuan's heartbroken expression. "Ruoqi, what's wrong?" I clung desperately to his robe, stammering incoherently. "My grandfather and grandmother are gone. Gu Yuan, you have to save them?" "You?" The courtyard suddenly lit up with lamps. Grandfather's attendant approached and asked, "Miss, is something wrong?" Further away, I could hear grandmother's voice. "Ruoqi, what happened?" It was as if I had just awoken from a nightmare. They were all fine, so it was just another dream? My body felt weak, and I was unable to speak. Gu Yuan responded on my behalf. "It's nothing, just a nightmare." The candlelight flickered faintly in the study. I still couldn't stop trembling, so Gu Yuan simply took off his fox fur cloak and wrapped it around me. "Your maid mentioned that you've been having trouble sleeping lately. I thought I'd come check on you," and his brows furrowed deeply as he looked down at me. "Ruoqi, is something troubling you?" I thought about it, but ultimately didn't tell him about my past and present lives. Even if I did, he wouldn't believe me. I only asked him to pay attention to the undercurrents in the court and to be extra careful if there was any news that could harm my grandfather. My grandfather fought on the battlefield in his youth. For the sake of rations and his soldiers, he offended many people. Now that he's old, and with his sons all fallen on the frontier, I just want him to have a peaceful old age. Gu Yuan looked at me for a long time, so long that I didn't dare meet his gaze. Finally, he spoke. "All right." That night, he stayed by my bedside. I fell asleep quickly. For once, I didn't have any nightmares. In my dream, the sun shone brightly as my grandmother held my tiny hand, leading me on an outing. My grandfather hoisted me onto a horse and laughed heartily. "My granddaughter will learn to walk on horseback." His palms, strong and calloused, had once wielded a blood-stained blade, yet those same hands had carried me through a carefree childhood. I couldn't help but tighten my grip, holding on tighter and tighter, so that he wouldn't leave. "Don't leave me." Through the long night, a single lamp glowed dimly. Its light outlined the solitary figure sitting by the bed. He looked down at the hand tightly clasping his dark eyes shadowed with a profound, inky blackness. The days passed by, one after another. I suddenly realized that the words spoken by the maid and the dishes prepared in the kitchen seemed no different from those of the same moments in my previous life. Every day, I divined and drew lots, but every reading pointed to despair, and every lot was an ill-fated one. I was so worried that I couldn't eat or sleep well. I asked the Empress Dowager for leave, using illness as my excuse. In truth, it wasn't entirely a lie. These days, I had grown so thin that I was almost unrecognizable. My grandfather and grandmother summoned renowned physicians from all over for me. They all said that my illness was a sickness of the heart. A sickness of the heart could not be cured with medicine. Grandmother was so anxious that she was nearly in tears. She asked me, "Ruoqi, what is troubling you?" All I could do was hold her hand. It was warm and her pulse was steady. Only then could I breathe and smile. "I'm not troubled. With you both here, I have nothing to worry about." But at night, I couldn't sleep and still went to find them. What I saw, however, was grandmother kneeling in the Buddha hall, pleading with the Bodhisattva. "If my husband and I are destined to leave this world soon, could you please bless our Ruoqi with a lifetime of health and peace?" Behind her, my grandfather, who had never believed in gods or Buddhas, also knelt down and kowtowed repeatedly. "I know that I have committed too many killings in my life. If there is retribution, let it fall on me alone, and do not involve my granddaughter." I felt as if I had been struck by lightning. On the night of the first snowfall, the weather was bitterly cold. Was I not the only one haunted by that bone-chilling dream? Gu Zhiyuan hadn't come to see me for a long time. I heard that His Majesty intended to grant him a marriage. The bride was said to be a commandery princess of a different surname, a descendant of a meritorious family, holding significant power in the northwest. Everyone knew this was an excellent match. Once the marriage was sealed, Gu Zhiyuan would undoubtedly become the crown prince. But none of this had anything to do with me anymore. The relationship between Gu Zhiyuan and me had always been about repayment. His wishes in this life were now fulfilled, and I had already kept my promise from my past life. This year, I was 16. In 3 days, it would be the day of my family's downfall from my previous life. Having been consumed with worry and anxiety until now, my heart was finally calm, as still as water. I picked up a brush and began writing a letter, which would be delivered to Gu Zhiyuan after my death. To Your Highness, when I was young, I was unruly, laughing and joking before the Buddha, never believing in reincarnation. Later, retribution came swiftly and without mercy. I endured endless humiliation, struggling in the mire, unable to find a way out. There was someone who loved me deeply, yet on that day, adorned with a 10-mile procession of red dowries, he married another bride. There was someone who was a stranger to me, yet on that day, he rode 1,000 miles to find me. Your Highness, you once asked why I helped you. Actually, I don't know either. In that dilapidated temple, why did that person come to help me? My question will remain unanswered, but I do not want you to be like me. Your Highness, Song Ruoqi of Bodhi House is not as pure and kind as she appears. She helped you only because you once helped her. Your Highness, the mountains and rivers are magnificent, and your future is boundless. May you be well, and may peace prevail for all eternity. When I finished writing the last stroke, I sealed the letter with wax. I handed it to Lan Ting, but she asked me, "Have you thought this through?" I did not answer her. Instead, I bowed deeply and said, "The nights in the palace are long. It is my fortune to have been under your care." She touched my cheek gently and said in a soft voice, "You are very much like your mother." The last day, someone came from the palace, and my grandfather was summoned to the palace. Before he left, he gave me a long, deep look but said nothing. 8 hours passed, and he still hadn't returned. It was exactly the same as in my previous life. I sought guidance through divination, but the result remained a death hex, the worst omen possible. The heavens were bent on destroying me. The sky grew ominous, dark clouds roiling and casting a suffocating shadow over the city. I stood in the Buddha hall, neither kneeling nor bowing, simply wanting to laugh. In this life, I returned and tried everything, every scheme, every plan. The traitors in the military had long been captured and executed. The so-called evidence of collusion and treason had been burned to ashes. Yet, none of it was enough to defy the hands of fate. The same day as my previous life, the same weather, the same moment, even the same eunuch arrived. He read out the same decree, summoning my grandfather to court without delay. I no longer struggled. I dressed neatly and went to find my grandfather and grandmother. In my fingers, I hid poison. In my sleeve, a dagger. If I had done all I could and still could not escape the grip of fate, then I would die before enduring humiliation. I would use my death as a futile but defiant blow against the heavens. But my grandmother held my hand and told me to change into coarse clothes. She pushed me into a mule cart and solemnly instructed me, "There is an ancestral home in the southwest. Beneath the 9th tree north of it, a box of gold is buried. Seek out a man surnamed Guan. He is the son of your wet nurse. He will protect you and give you a stable life." I shook my head furiously. "No, I won't go." My grandmother shoved me with all her strength. "Ruoqi, don't be foolish. You must go." In the struggle, the dagger slipped from my sleeve and fell to the ground. Grandmother froze, bent down to pick it up, and in that instant, as if understanding everything, tears poured down her face. I gripped her hands tightly and spoke each word with unwavering resolve. "Grandmother, the Marquis Zhongyang household is filled with unyielding pride. As your granddaughter, I refuse to be a deserter. If fate cannot be changed, then I will fight it to the bloody end." At 1/4 past U hour, dark clouds blanketed the sky. Grandfather had yet to return. An eunuch arrived from the palace, announcing His Majesty's decree. He ordered my grandmother and me to enter the palace immediately. Otherwise, the imperial guards outside Marquis Zhongyang's residence would set fire to the gate. The eunuch smiled falsely. "Shall we?" I stepped forward without paying him any heed and grabbed a young eunuch from the group. I knocked off his hat and pulled out his hairpin. Her expression changed to one of panic. It was none other than the ninth princess. Everyone erupted in astonishment. Instinctively, the ninth princess tried to fight back, but I shoved her hard to the ground. Then, I stomped on her mercilessly, pinning her so she couldn't move. The eunuchs became agitated, and all tried to stop me. But my family's guards immediately formed a solid wall before me, impenetrable as an iron fortress. The lead eunuch glanced nervously at the ninth princess before speaking coldly to me. "Miss Song, what are you doing? The nobility of the palace is not for you to trample upon." I pressed my foot harder against her chest and said calmly, "I don't care." Under my foot, the ninth princess shrieked with rage. "Song Ruoqi, I will have you executed by 1,000 cuts." I lowered my head, locking eyes with her, the same venomous gaze I remembered from my past life. Finally, I smiled. "Ninth princess, I await your 1,000 cuts." A eunuch in the corner, noticing that things were not going well, began sneaking away and attempted to inform the imperial guards. With just a look from grandmother, one of our guards kicked him to the ground, capturing him on the spot. The lead eunuch barked angrily, "Do you intend to rebel?" Grandmother rose slowly, her voice icy. "Why can't we rebel when the ruler is unworthy?" I added, "Eunuch Zhang, we met last winter at Consort Yu's side. Don't you remember?" The lead eunuch's eyes flickered, still feigning bravado as he declared, "What Consort Yu? I am here under the Emperor's orders. Your defiance will earn the imperial family's wrath." As he spoke, he tried to pull the ninth princess away. Trying to run? In your dreams, the dagger slid from my sleeve into my palm. I pulled the ninth princess up and held the dagger to her neck. "Are you here to laugh at me? Have you ever thought that if someone has already decided to give up their own life, they can never become a laughingstock?" She panted and said, "Song Ruoqi, Peishu thinks you're a divine and virtuous lady, but you're just a madwoman. He should really come and see your true face." Peishu. Peishu again. In my past life, I was humiliated because of him. Must I suffer the same disgrace under the same pretense in this life? I coldly pressed the dagger deeper, and in an instant, blood began to seep out. The ninth princess immediately fell silent, her legs trembling uncontrollably as she quaked in fear. Suddenly, a cacophony of noise erupted outside the door, growing louder and louder. In just a few breaths, roaring flames shot up, illuminating half the sky. Grandmother stood abruptly. The ninth princess let out a hoarse laugh. "Song Ruoqi, you're finished. My brother and mother must have come looking for me since I've been gone for so long. Song Ruoqi, I will carve your flesh inch by inch, hang your head on the city gates, and let the masses spit on you. I will—" Smack! Grandmother slapped her across the face. The force of the slap left the ninth princess's cheek swollen and red in an instant, a trace of blood trickling from the corner of her lips. "You hit me? Do you know who I am? My brother is about to inherit the throne. I will be second only to one person above all others." Smack! Another slap landed. Grandmother flexed her wrist, her tone calm and kind. "I hit you because you're a foul-mouthed, nonsensical thing." She beckoned with her hand, and a maid skillfully stuffed a rag into the ninth prince's mouth. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were wide with fury, and she looked like a madwoman. She was held down tightly by strong maids and couldn't move. The sounds of fighting outside grew louder and louder. It was the imperial guards clashing with the personal soldiers of our household. In the distance, the dying cries of men could still be faintly heard. The soldiers of our household had followed my grandfather, uncle, and father through countless battles on the frontier. They hadn't died defending the country, so were they going to die in a palace coup? Their lives, like mine, were no less precious or noble. Grandmother and I exchanged a glance, and we instantly understood each other's thoughts. In unison, we declared, "Open the gates!" The personal soldiers and guards tried their best to dissuade us. "Everyone in the household is willing to risk their lives to protect you. Old madam, There's really no need for you to put yourself in danger. That's right, old madam. We can still fight and are ready to die for our lords. The glow of countless torches illuminated familiar and resolute faces. The sounds of fighting outside the gate were deafening, and at any moment, a comrade might die. The Imperial Guards numbered in the tens of thousands, while our personal soldiers were only a few hundred. It was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot or an egg striking a rock. Classic military taboos. Grandmother surveyed the surroundings one last time before speaking, her voice resolute and firm. It is precisely because you are willing to risk your lives for me that I cannot allow you to die for my sake. The Marquise Zhongyang's household has always led from the front. The residence gates swung open. The clamor of the fighting outside momentarily halted. The old madam, clad in battle armor and wielding a long sword, stood in the doorway with her young granddaughter by her side. I heard someone was looking for me, so here I am. The blood and fire reflected an orange hue on her white hair. She stood tall and dignified, her calm smile unwavering. I am over 70 years old. I am not worth such a commotion. Where is the commander of the Imperial Guards? Lead the way! The surroundings fell silent. A tall horse approached and stopped nearby. The rider's face looked familiar, and he spoke first. Where is the 9th princess? Ah, that's right. He was the younger brother of Consort Yu and the uncle of the 9th princess. From inside the residence came the 9th princess's sharp cry. Uncle! Our personal soldiers, having bound her tightly, dragged her out and threw her at the gates. Unable to move, she could only shout, Uncle! They bullied me. You must stand up for me. In my past life, I went to strike the drum of injustice to seek justice for my grandparents. However, instead of waiting for the emperor's eunuch, I was greeted by the 9th princess. The look in her eyes was as if she were staring at a corpse. So you're Songro Chi? Her tone was filled with mockery. The famed candlelight before the Buddha, Peishu's beloved fiancé? Turns out you're not so special after all. But I was still humbly pleading. Your Highness, please present my case. My grandfather is absolutely innocent of treason. Please, let His Majesty see the truth. The 9th princess chuckled scornfully. With your status, you wish to meet His Majesty? Do you even deserve it? She ordered her people to drag me away, telling me to go back to my dilapidated temple. On the way, I was shackled and paraded through the streets as a criminal, although I didn't know what crime I had committed. Compared to the humiliation I endured back then, 9th princess, what you're suffering now is nothing. But General Yu did not see it that way. He glanced at the 9th princess, then turned his dark gaze toward us. Arrest them! Our soldiers and guards around fought desperately, but were ultimately overwhelmed. The 9th princess triumphantly, Songro Chi, I've told you before, when the time comes, it will be the day of your death. She broke free from the people supporting her, held a hairpin, and walked up to me. The cold, sharp tip of the hairpin grazed my face. Her gaze was like that of a venomous snake. Songro-chi, how did you make Peishu so infatuated with you? He rejected me and refused to see me again. Tell me, if this face of yours were mangled and hideous, would he still be in love with you? I smiled faintly. You won't win. She froze. What did you say? Flames consumed half the city, illuminating the night as though it were day. Tonight's journey toward death felt much warmer than before. This place is quite fitting, I repeated. You won't win. A poison pill embedded in my teeth was my final safeguard tonight. I had vowed, even if I died, I would die before fate's arrangement. Very well. Even now, you're still putting on airs. Let me show you who will win. I'll shred your face, expose your corpse in the wilderness, and let the world see that this candlelight before the Buddha is nothing but mortal flesh and bones. The 9th princess, provoked, grabbed my chin and slashed down with the hairpin. Whoosh! An arrow tore through the air, shattering the hairpin in her hand. I opened my eyes immediately and looked ahead. At the end of the road, the sound of galloping hooves echoed as countless soldiers and horses surged forward. Leading the charge, Gu Zhuyuan rode alone into the fray. The crimson glow of flames reflected on him, but could not illuminate the icy killing intent in his gaze. I saw him nock an arrow. I saw him draw the bowstring. I saw the arrow pierce through the head of the 9th princess, the white fletching at its tail still trembling. A spray of blood splattered onto my cheek, and the ninth princess's lifeless body collapsed heavily at my feet. The sounds of battle erupted once more. The general advanced as if entering a realm devoid of foes, his black boots trampling through pools of blood. Gujiyuan reached out and lifted me into his arms. "I'm late," he said hoarsely. For a brief moment, I couldn't distinguish between this life and the last. In my past life, someone had once cradled me tenderly in their arms, whispering the same regretful words of being late. But in this life, this man held me tightly, his voice trembling with fear and lingering dread. I had a long, long dream. In the Imperial Garden, he had once eavesdropped from behind the wall. He heard the girl he loved, every word filled with tears, saying she had a long dream where she was betrayed and deserted. And after waking up, she felt empty. In the late-night corridor of the Marquise's residence, he held the desperate girl in his arms, listening as she trembled and asked anxiously about her grandparents' safety. He was once puzzled. This girl was of noble birth and had a smooth life. Where did so much sorrow come from? Until a few nights ago, because of that girl's sleep-talking, he finally decided to take the initiative. He obtained solid evidence and discovered the fourth prince's rebellious intentions. He decided to hold back and retreat behind the scenes, but in reality, he was preparing to stage a play to confirm the fourth prince's guilt. That day, when he returned to the palace, the moon was already high in the sky. He received a letter forwarded by Lan Ting. "I was supposed to give this to you in a few days, but I decided to break my promise." The letter was gentle and sincere, as if one could see the girl's gentle smile and hear her voice, but it made him even more puzzled. She wrote that he had helped her first, but in his memory, their first encounter had been in the snow outside the Buddha Hall. Filled with doubts, he couldn't sleep at night and drifted into a light sleep. In the dream, he was still the fifth prince of Qixia Palace, lonely and without support, but he was unable to move, only an observer. Through his own eyes, he watched the rise and fall of the capital's affairs, each moment aligning perfectly with what that girl had described as a long dream. He saw her burning with fever for days, yet still seeking medical help for her grandmother. He saw her being avoided by her fiancé, saw her despondent in the rain, haggard and weary. He also saw her cleaning a Buddha statue in a dilapidated temple, only to fall from a great height. He wanted to reach out to catch her, but he couldn't move. He saw her playing the chin behind a curtain, her hands covered in blood. His heart ached, and he almost wanted to howl. He tried to break through this invisible barrier to hold his beloved girl, but he was merely an observer, trapped in the dream, with no way to intervene. Until the final day, when he saw the Pei family decorating their residence with lanterns and festoons, preparing to marry the ninth princess. The couple bowed to heaven and earth, and then plotted to take that girl's life. The betrothal gifts were not enough. Their wedding night was to be celebrated with the blood of an innocent person. He felt an unprecedented fury and despair, repeatedly questioning the heavens why they treated his girl this way. That girl was an extremely good girl. She should have met an extremely good person and lived an extremely good life. Why treat her so cruelly? He was the hero of the white rainbow piercing the sun, and he was about to be torn apart. Finally, he gained control over the dream. He took a fast horse, racing toward the dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city. It was the night of the first snowfall. The weather was bitterly cold. He had to save his girl. He only regretted that he could not grow wings. But later, the young general lowered his eyes in pain, unable to continue. I stepped forward and gently embraced him. What happened after, I already knew. In that dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city, I bled from all my 7 orifices, slumped over a prayer mat, weeping before a dust-covered Guanyin statue. Guanyin remained silent, gazing at me with sorrowful compassion. Outside, an urgent sound of galloping hooves broke through the stillness. Someone, cloaked in a frigid aura, approached me. My eyes had already lost their sight, yet I futilely turned toward his direction, my voice hoarse as I pleaded. "Whoever you are, please, ensure my body is taken care of. In the next life, I will surely repay you." He trembled as he held me in his arms. A single scorching tear fell upon my brow. It was the night of the first snowfall. The weather was bitterly cold. The first time Guanyin came to save me, he had already given me his unwavering devotion. Then, on that snowy day in front of the Buddha Hall, when I met Guanyin for the first time again, he was already my savior. In my past and present lives, the compassionate bodhisattva lowered his gaze, unwilling to witness mortal suffering. And the connection between Guanyin and me, like a fish biting its tail, was the intergrowth of yin and yang. From a single thought, a Bodhi grows. Later, the official history recorded this calamity in a few strokes. The fourth prince, Jujin, was disloyal and unfilial. He conspired with his maternal family to rebel, led the imperial guards to besiege the capital, and attempted to force the emperor to abdicate. Fortunately, the fifth prince, Juyuan, returned from the northwest with the old troops of the Marquis Zhongyang. They descended like divine soldiers and defended the capital. After this battle, Guanyin was conferred the title of Crown Prince. Consort Yu and the fourth prince were both executed, and the entire Yu clan was sentenced to death. Later, it was discovered that the Pei family had close ties with the ninth princess, who died in the rebellion, and also had rebellious intentions. Considering their intention but lack of action, His Majesty showed mercy and exiled the entire family. The road of exile for Pei Shu passed by the Marquis Zhongyang's residence. That day, my grandparents and I were drinking tea and admiring the flowers. Suddenly, a piercing cry came from outside the gates. He shouted, "Ruoqi, whether you believe me or not, my feelings for you are truly sincere." The maid reported that the second son of the Pei family was immediately punished with dozens of strokes and dragged away silently. I said nothing, merely turning the prayer beads on my wrist. They were a gift from Guanyin for my 16th birthday. Despite his busy schedule, he had personally carved them. As the beads moved through my fingers, my mind grew clear and tranquil. He once said, "Ruoqi, with me here in this life, you can sit in the Buddha Hall and no longer have to worry." This year, I turned 16 and did not die in the snowstorm. My grandparents were still by my side. A eunuch brought a decree from the Empress Dowager. It stated that Miss Song of the Marquis Zhongyang's residence had demonstrated great loyalty and righteousness during the upheaval, willingly sacrificing herself to uphold the royal lineage. Her utmost loyalty and filial piety made her a fitting match for the crown prince. Thus, the decree granted her marriage to him. This was the Empress Dowager's gift to me for my 16th birthday. Behind the eunuch, someone brushed past the willows and flowers, stepping toward me. He reached out and held my hand with the utmost care. His pair of jet-black eyes locked onto mine, holding layer upon layer of an inscrutable cycle of reincarnation. The world has countless causes and effects, yet a single thread binds a destined union. We despaired in the wind and snow, but also found salvation within it. As the snow cleared, the sun warmed, and flowers bloomed. The Bodhisattva lowered her gaze, indifferent to worldly affairs.